What if the most powerful thing you could say was nothing at all? Imagine standing in a room full of people arguing. Everyone is raising their voice, cutting each other off, trying to outsmart the next person. But there's one person who doesn't say a word, they just watch, calm, focused. And somehow everyone notices them more than the ones yelling. That's not silence from fear, that's silence as strategy. Nietzsche understood this better than most, not because he avoided conflict, but because he mastered it, on his terms. In his words, he who cannot put his thoughts on ice should not enter into the heat of dispute. Think about that. If you can't hold back, if you can't pause, reflect, and decide what's actually worth saying, then you're just reacting. And reacting is the opposite of power. We've been trained to think that silence equals weakness. That if you're quiet, you're being passive. But that's not always true. Sometimes silence is a trap you set. Sometimes it's the thing that keeps others guessing. It's the unknown factor, the one they can't predict. Most people argue to win. They want to be right. They want to prove something. But Nietzsche, he wasn't obsessed with being right. He was obsessed with being sharp, precise, surgical. He didn't waste words. He didn't argue to feed his ego. He argued to reveal truth. And if truth couldn't be revealed through the fight, he walked away. That's something to pay attention to, because a lot of people don't walk away. They cling to the argument like it's a lifeline. Like if they lose it, they lose a piece of themselves. But if your identity depends on winning a debate with someone who doesn't matter, you've already lost. You've handed over control. Here's when you shouldn't argue. When you're just defending your ego, when the other person isn't open to change, when it's a pointless emotional loop, when silence itself would say more. We've all been there, caught in that moment where someone says something that digs at you, and your first instinct is to fire back, to correct them, to defend yourself. But what if you didn't? What if you just let it hang in the air, not because you're weak, but because you know it's not worth your breath? Arguing without strategy is weakness. Arguing with precision is power. There's a big difference. Nietzsche didn't avoid conflict. He embraced it, but only when it served his growth, only when it sharpened him. And that's the key. If an argument makes you weaker, walk away. If it makes you sharper, lean in. If it's just a distraction, ignore it completely. Conflict is not the enemy, but pointless conflict is. Think of it like training. If you're fighting just to fight, you're wasting your energy. But if you're fighting to learn, to master the way your opponent thinks, to understand the terrain, you're building something. Discipline, awareness, control, and all of that comes from knowing when to speak and when not to. True power doesn't lie in being the loudest voice in the room. It lies in being the most intentional, the one who isn't desperate to be heard, but who chooses to be heard only when it matters. Let's take it further. Imagine this. You wake up tomorrow and a voice tells you, you only have 100 words left to speak in your entire life. That's it. Every word you say from now on takes away from that total. Now ask yourself, how would you speak? Would you use those words in a pointless argument? Would you waste them proving something to someone who doesn't care? Or would you pause, choose carefully, and say only what's worth saying? That's what Nietzsche did. He used language like a weapon, not a machine gun spraying everywhere. A blade, refined, intentional, sharp. Words are currency. The more you spend them carelessly, the less valuable they become. Let's say you're in the middle of an argument. Your heart's racing, your mind's spinning. You've got comebacks loaded up like bullets. You want to win. But stop. Breathe. Ask yourself, who really holds the power here? The one frantically trying to prove something, or the one who doesn't need to? Power isn't loud. It's not emotional outbursts. It's not dominance through volume. It's presence, calm, control. Silence isn't emptiness. It's space. And in that space, people project their own thoughts, their own insecurities, their own doubts, and that's what gives it power. When you choose not to speak, you force others to fill in the blanks. You make them question themselves. You make them wonder what you're thinking. That's leverage. That's psychological weight. So the next time you feel that urge to speak up, to clap back, to correct someone, pause, observe. Watch what they reveal about themselves in the way they talk. Their tone, their speed, their choice of words. That's all data. And you? You stay still. You collect. Because when you do choose to speak, your words will land harder. They'll carry weight, because people will know. You don't speak unless it matters. And that makes them listen. That's the edge. Let's flip the question. What if the goal isn't to win the argument, but to never need to argue in the first place? That's the next level Nietzsche pushes us toward. He wasn't just interested in conflict, he was interested in transcending it, rising above the noise, not by ignoring it, but by seeing through it. He looked at arguments the way a chess master looks at a beginner's opening move, not with panic, but with patience. He wasn't reacting, he was observing. And that's what most people miss. They confuse silence with retreat. But it's actually the opposite. Strategic silence is a form of dominance, it's control, it's restraint. Because in a world that's constantly reacting, firing off opinions, flooding comment sections, chasing every little provocation, the one who doesn't react is the one who stands out. Think about your own life. How often have you said something in the heat of the moment, only to regret it later? How many times have you defended yourself, only to realize later it wasn't even necessary? Most of our arguments aren't about truth. They're about emotion, ego, identity. We don't argue to understand. We argue to be seen. But Nietzsche wasn't interested in being seen. He was interested in seeing clearly. And clarity doesn't come from shouting. It comes from silence, from stepping back, from creating space between stimulus and response. There's a quote often attributed to Viktor Frankl, another philosopher, that captures this perfectly. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. That space is where real power lives. So when Nietzsche talks about arguing only when it sharpens you, what he's really pointing to is that space, the ability to not react instantly, to sit in silence, to analyze, reflect, and then respond with precision, or not respond at all. Because here's the truth. Not every fight is yours to fight. Not every argument is worth stepping into. And not every provocation deserves your energy. That's emotional discipline. That's self-mastery. Now here's the twist. The moment you start practicing this kind of restraint, you'll notice something weird. People start reacting more to your silence than they ever did to your words. It confuses them. It unsettles them. Because most people are used to others jumping in, defending, over-explaining. But when you don't do that, when you just sit there watching, they start to wonder. What's he thinking? Why isn't he responding? Did I say something wrong? They fill in the blanks. And the moment they start doing that, you're in control. You flip the script. This isn't just some abstract philosophical idea. This is practical psychology. Human beings are wired to seek patterns. We want resolution. We want to tie up loose ends. But when you introduce ambiguity, when you don't give them that tidy little answer, they get uncomfortable. And that discomfort makes them take you more seriously. Because now you're not predictable. You're not easily controlled. You're not reacting the way they expect. And that unpredictability, that's power. Let's get even more concrete. Let's say someone insults you, calls you weak, stupid, fake, whatever. Your first instinct is probably to defend yourself, to shoot back, to prove them wrong. But pause. What if you didn't respond at all? What if you just stared at them? Calm, still, unreadable. You've just created psychological weight. They threw a punch, and you didn't flinch. That alone sends a message. You don't control me. And that's what this is really about. Control. Not control over others, but control over yourself, over your emotions, your reactions, your words. Because once you master that, you become incredibly difficult to manipulate. People can't get under your skin, they can't bait you. They can't force you into battles you didn't choose. Nietzsche wrote a lot about strength, not just physical or intellectual strength, but strength of spirit. And for him, strength wasn't loud. It wasn't about dominance through volume. It was about standing firm in your own values, not being moved by every little insult or disagreement, not needing to prove yourself constantly. That's the silent trick. Not silence as passivity, but silence as power, as clarity, as strategy. And the deeper you go into this, the more you start to realize something else. Most people who argue loudly are compensating for something. Insecurity, fear, the need to be validated. They talk because they're scared of what silence might reveal. But if you're comfortable in silence, If you can sit with it, own it, control it, you become something rare, something that can't be shaken, because you're not trying to win approval. You're not trying to be understood by everyone. You've chosen your battles. You've chosen your voice. And more importantly, you've chosen when not to use it. Here's a challenge. Next time you feel triggered, next time someone says something that lights you up, don't react, just watch. Feel the tension rise in your body. Feel the need to respond build up. And then, do nothing. Just sit with it. Let it pass. That's hard. It's uncomfortable. It'll feel like you're losing. But you're not. You're learning to master yourself. And once you can do that, nobody can control you. Because most of the time we argue not because we're strong, but because we're scared. Scared of being misunderstood. Scared of looking weak. Scared of losing social ground. But once you realize that those fears don't actually matter, that your value doesn't change based on what someone else thinks, you stop needing to argue. You speak only when it adds value, when it builds something, when it moves you closer to clarity. And that makes every word you say 10 times more powerful. So ask yourself this: would you rather be the person who always has something to say? Or the person who speaks so rarely that when they do, the whole room goes quiet? Nietzsche chose the second, and so can you. But it takes practice. It takes rewiring your instincts. Because everything around you, social media, culture, politics, rewards fast, loud, emotional reactions. But you're not here to be average. You're here to be precise, strategic, focused. And that means rewiring your relationship with conflict. You don't avoid it. But you don't seek it either. You use it on your terms, in your time. You choose your words like a warrior chooses his strikes. Not out of fear, but out of discipline. You don't fight every battle. You fight the ones that matter, and you fight them with intention. Because you know something most people don't. Silence used well is louder than 1,000 empty words. And power, real power, doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be understood. Eventually, people around you start to notice. You're not the person constantly talking. You're the one listening, watching, calculating. And when you do speak, your words carry gravity. Because they're rare, because they're earned, because they mean something. So if you want influence, if you want presence, if you want to walk into a room and shift the entire mood without saying a thing, start here. Master your silence. Master your timing. Master your emotional control. And when you do speak, speak like it's your last sentence on earth, because that's how power is built. Not by dominating every conversation, but by choosing the ones that matter and showing up for them like a sharpened blade. The rest? Let it go. Let's go even deeper now. Because this isn't just about philosophy, it's about history, it's about power, not in theory and practice. Some of the most powerful people in history didn't win through force, or volume, or emotional outbursts. They won because they mastered the silence between moves. They understood the psychological weight of not reacting. They made silence do the talking for them. Let's start with Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, Stoic philosopher. The most powerful man in the world, and yet famously quiet. He could have crushed his enemies with a sentence, but more often, he didn't say a word. He let his actions speak. He let the silence after someone's insult make them uncomfortable. He wrote in Meditations, a journal he never intended to publish, that it's better to remain calm, composed, and indifferent in the face of insult than to try and defend yourself like a child desperate for approval. He understood something most of us forget. Every time you argue, you're admitting that the other person's opinion matters. Every time you try to prove yourself, you're putting their judgment above your own. But when you stay silent, when you refuse to be baited, you're saying, you don't get to decide who I am. That's not arrogance. That's power grounded in clarity. Jump ahead a couple thousand years, and you'll find another master of this, James Baldwin. Baldwin was one of the sharpest thinkers of the 20th century. He debated, yes, but he never argued. Not in the emotional, reactive sense. He had this way of letting others exhaust themselves in noise, and then replying with one line, so precise, so clean, it cut through everything. He knew how to wait. He'd pause for just long enough to make the silence feel uncomfortable. And that pause, that was the blade. That was where people started to squirm, because silence forces people to reflect. It echoes. It turns the spotlight back onto them. Same with Malcolm X, he didn't waste words. When he spoke, people listened, because they knew he wasn't performing. He wasn't scrambling to defend himself, he was speaking from control, from intention. And even in the world of warfare, you'll find the same pattern. Sun Tzu wrote The Art of War 2,500 years ago, and it's still quoted today for a reason. One of his core ideas. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. That's what silence can do. It disarms people before the first blow. It makes them question themselves. It makes them reveal their own weaknesses, because in that space of silence, people start to panic. They rush to fill the gap. They over-explain. They overcompensate. And when they do, you learn everything you need to know. Let's pause here and really break that down. Why is silence so effective? Because humans are uncomfortable with ambiguity, with open loops, with tension that doesn't resolve. Think about any argument you've been in. What feels worse, hearing someone insult you directly, or watching someone just smile at your insult and walk away? One makes you feel like you've won. The other makes you feel uncertain. And that uncertainty haunts people more than anything else. That's why so many arguments are just people desperately trying to close that loop, to get the last word, to feel in control. But the one who refuses to play that game, the one who lets the tension hang in the air, they walk away with the real power, because they've mastered restraint. And here's something Nietzsche would agree with. Restraint isn't weakness, it's a higher form of strength. Anyone can yell, anyone can argue. But to hold back when your entire ego is screaming at you to fight back, that takes something rare. Discipline, vision, self-trust. Let's bring it back to Nietzsche himself. He wasn't a pacifist. He didn't believe in avoiding all conflict, but he was selective, ruthlessly so. He believed most arguments were emotional traps, designed to suck you into someone else's drama, someone else's chaos. And if you didn't recognize that, you'd end up fighting battles that only drained you. So he chose carefully. And when he did write, he wrote with daggers. Not paragraphs of emotional venting, just a few lines sharper than steel. And because he didn't write for approval, every word carried weight. He said, "The surest way to corrupt a youth is to instruct him to hold in higher esteem those who think alike than those who think differently." That's a warning about echo chambers, about surrounding yourself with people who constantly agree with you, because you're too afraid to face real opposition. But what if you weren't afraid of opposition? What if you welcomed it? Not emotionally, but strategically. Then suddenly conflict becomes fuel. You don't fight every time, you don't react every time. But when you do, it means something. Let me tell you a story. There's this samurai legend from feudal Japan. A master swordsman was challenged to a duel. The challenger was loud, arrogant, and disrespectful. He taunted the samurai, trying to get under his skin, but the samurai said nothing. He just accepted the duel and showed up hours late. By the time he arrived, the challenger was sweating, angry, exhausted, his nerves shot. The silence had done more damage than 1,000 words could have. The duel lasted one strike, because the samurai had already won, before the fight began. That's psychological warfare. That's Nietzschean silence. Not passive, not weak, but lethal. And you can apply this to your life right now. You don't need a sword. You just need to remember this. When someone tries to pull you into an emotional fight, your silence is a test, a challenge. You're telling them, you'll have to do better than that. And 9 times out of 10, they can't. Because most people are fighting themselves, they just don't know it. They're projecting, deflecting, flailing around, trying to feel powerful by making you feel small. But when you don't give them that reaction, when you stay calm, focused, unbothered, you're holding up a mirror. And what they see in that mirror, that's what really shakes them. So, here's the core takeaway. Power isn't about controlling others. It's about mastering yourself. It's about choosing silence not because you're scared, but because you've already won. Because you don't need the last word. Because you've already said everything that matters. By saying nothing at all. That's what Nietzsche knew. That's what Marcus Aurelius knew. That's what every real strategist, leader, and master of conflict has known throughout history. And now you know it too. But knowing isn't enough. You have to live it. Practice it. So try this. Next time someone throws a passive-aggressive comment your way, don't defend yourself, just look at them. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3, then turn and walk away. No sarcasm, no eye roll, just complete surgical disinterest. They'll feel it, harder than any insult you could have thrown back, because silence carries weight. And once you learn how to use it, not just as a shield but as a weapon, you become untouchable, not because people stop attacking you, but because they realize it's pointless. Let's slow down for a second. By now you already get it. Silence isn't weakness, it's a tool, a form of pressure, a mirror, a test. But what makes it really powerful is that most people can't hold it. Most people cave under the weight of their own thoughts. The second there's a pause, they rush to fill it. They panic in the quiet, they need validation, reassurance, something to grasp onto. And if you can sit still in that discomfort, if you can wait longer than they can, you win by default. That's what makes silence such a dangerous kind of strength. It's not just what it says to others. It's what it forces them to say about themselves. It reveals character, fast. But here's the part most people never talk about. Learning how to use silence isn't just about doing something different. It's about becoming someone different. You don't just stop talking. You build something underneath the silence. Confidence, clarity, direction. Because if your silence is empty, people will sense that. They'll smell the insecurity behind it. But when your silence is full of intention, it terrifies people. Because then it means you're not confused, you're not scared. You're just waiting. And they have no idea what for. Let's go back to Nietzsche. He spent a lot of time alone, not just because he was introverted, but because he believed that solitude was where you hear your real voice. When you're around other people, your mind is constantly reacting, editing itself, performing, second-guessing. But in silence, there's nothing to bounce off of, just you. And that's when you find out what's actually in your head, not what you repeat from others, not what you think you're supposed to say, but what you really think, what you really want, what you really fear. That's uncomfortable. That's why people avoid it. But Nietzsche embraced it. He leaned into the isolation. He used it to sharpen himself, to cut away everything that didn't matter. And what he found in that silence was power. The kind of power that doesn't need applause, doesn't need to prove anything, doesn't need to fight every battle because it already knows what it stands for. And when you reach that place, your presence alone becomes enough. You walk into a room and you don't have to perform. People feel that. They sense there's something solid about you. Grounded, quiet, but not empty. Still, but not weak. It's like standing next to a mountain. It's not moving. It doesn't need to. And that stillness is exactly what makes it so powerful. You can be that, but you have to earn it. Because silence without substance is just awkward. And here's the secret. The heavier your silence, the fewer words you'll ever need. One look, one sentence, one move, and everything shifts. Let me give you something practical here. There's a trick, used in negotiation, sales, leadership, even interrogation. It's called the strategic pause. You make your point. Then you stop talking, not a little pause, a long one. Long enough to make it weird. Most people can't take it. They break the tension, they start babbling, they reveal things they didn't mean to. They try to fill the space, and that's when their position falls apart. But if you hold the silence, just let it hang there comfortably, you flip the power dynamic instantly. Because now you're the one who's in control of the space, the pacing, the energy. And even if they don't consciously notice it, subconsciously they start reacting to you. You lead the rhythm just by doing nothing. And if you use this with intention, not in a fake, manipulative way, but as a reflection of your self-mastery, it's one of the most effective psychological tools on the planet. It works in personal relationships too. Someone accuses you of something, tries to trigger you, hopes you'll bite. Don't, just pause. Not passive-aggressively, not with ego, just calmly. Let the silence stretch. And in that silence, something changes. The power shifts. Because you didn't take the bait. You stayed composed, present, in control. And now they're left with their own noise. Let's be honest. Most people don't want to argue. They want reassurance or validation or control. But when you stay calm and quiet, you're holding up a mirror and making them deal with themselves. And if they can't, that's not your problem. That's their unfinished business. Let's take this one step further. True silence is not just about what you withhold. It's about what you understand. When you stop talking all the time, you start to notice things. The way people phrase things, what they don't say, their tone, their eyes, their breathing. Their little micro-expressions when they lie or feel uncertain. And now you're not just quiet, you're dangerous, because you see more than they think you do. You notice the insecurity under the confidence, the resentment under the joke, the fear under the anger. And when you see that, you stop taking things personally, you stop overreacting, you stop trying to win every fight, because now you realize most people's words aren't about you, they're projections, scripts, patterns. And when you can see through those patterns, you're not just free from them, you're in control of the entire conversation. All because you chose to listen more than you speak. You chose to watch instead of perform. You chose to hold space instead of trying to fill it. That's what makes silence a superpower. It lets you observe more, react less, and speak only when it's absolutely necessary. And when you finally speak, it lands. Hard. Because you're not just throwing words around, you're aiming. Every sentence you say carries a reason. And that reason is felt, whether people understand it or not. This is what Nietzsche meant when he wrote, "It is not a lack of love, but a lack of friendship that makes unhappy marriages." He was saying what we think is the problem so often isn't. The real issue is deeper, under the surface, and most people never sit in silence long enough to see it. So they argue about symptoms, never the cause. But if you can go quiet, internally and externally, you start to feel where the real tension is, the real cracks, the real problem. And that awareness makes you powerful in a way that has nothing to do with domination and everything to do with clarity. That's the kind of power you want. Not the loud, flashy, insecure kind. The quiet, precise, unshakable kind. The kind of power that can walk away from a fight and still win it. Because when you no longer need to argue, defend, or prove, you've already elevated yourself. And when you finally choose to speak, it means something. It moves people. Because they know. If you're speaking, it's not by accident, it's on purpose. And that purpose, that's the real difference between noise and influence. Between reaction and mastery. Between being just another voice in the crowd and being the one voice that cuts through all of it. That's the silent trick that gives you power. And it's not a trick at all. It's a mindset, a discipline, a practice. And if you keep training it one day, you'll realize you don't need to speak unless you want to. And that choice, that's where the real power begins. So here's the truth you're probably starting to feel now. You don't need to be loud to be strong. You don't need to constantly explain yourself, justify your feelings, or prove you're right. You don't even need to win every argument. What you need is clarity. Because when you're clear on what matters, you stop chasing every conflict. You stop bleeding energy into situations that don't deserve it. And silence becomes your default. Not because you're afraid to speak, but because you don't have to. That's where Nietzsche quietly points us. Not to power over others, but to power over yourself. And self-mastery is the scariest kind of power there is. Because the person who doesn't need attention is the hardest to manipulate. And the person who can sit in complete silence while others fall apart. That person is a storm in disguise. Let's flip this now. Because silence isn't just a defense, it's also an offense. In a world obsessed with speed, constant updates and hot takes, silence makes people uncomfortable. They don't know what you're thinking. They don't know where you stand. They don't know what's coming. And that mystery gives you leverage. When you speak less, people listen more. Every word hits harder. Every pause means something. And the less they know about your inner world, the more they fill in the blanks themselves. You become a canvas for their imagination, their insecurity, their fears. And that means even your silence can be a mirror, showing them more about themselves than you. That's a strange kind of power, but it's real. Think about the last time someone didn't respond to your message, or someone stared at you without saying anything, or when a conversation fell into a long, awkward silence. What happened? Your mind raced, you filled in the blanks, started analyzing. Are they mad? Are they judging me? Did I say something wrong? But maybe they weren't thinking about you at all. Or maybe they were, but on their own terms. That's the danger of silence. It opens a door. And the mind hates unanswered doors. So it tries to close them with whatever story it can find. Now here's the catch. If you use silence just to be manipulative, people will eventually sense it. It'll feel hollow, inauthentic, off. But if your silence comes from a place of genuine strength, from deep inner peace, clear values, and emotional control, it becomes magnetic. Because in a noisy world, the person who doesn't shout stands out the most. And that's something Nietzsche tapped into long before social media existed. He wasn't just talking about physical silence. He meant something deeper. Psychological silence, stillness of the mind, freedom from the need to react. When everyone else is caught in a storm of opinions, fears, and arguments, you stay still. You watch. And when you finally decide to act, it's surgical. Calm, focused, because you're not coming from chaos, you're coming from clarity. Now I want to leave you with something practical. It's easy to romanticize silence, to talk about power and discipline and strategy. But in the real world, things get messy. You're going to be tempted to defend yourself. You're going to feel pressure to respond. You're going to get baited into conversations that drain you. So here's a rule, a personal code. Call it the 3 filters of powerful silence. Before you speak, ask yourself, 1. Does this need to be said? Not everything deserves a response. Not every opinion needs to be shared. Silence is often the better answer. Does this need to be said by me? Sometimes it's not your battle, not your lesson to teach, not your fire to put out. Let people carry their own weight. Does this need to be said by me right now? Timing is everything. Even the truth can fall flat or backfire if it's delivered at the wrong moment. Sometimes waiting makes your words 10x more effective. If it fails any of those filters, stay silent. And if it passes all 3, speak with precision, with force, with purpose. Let your words be like a knife, not waving around but cutting exactly where it's needed. Because that's what powerful people do. They don't waste energy. They don't talk to be heard. They speak to shape things. And when they're silent, you feel it. You respect it. You wonder what they're thinking. You notice their presence even more than their voice. That's the energy you want to carry. You're not just holding back for the sake of mystery. You're building a kind of gravitational pull around you. A sense of control, of weight, of depth. People can feel when someone has done the inner work. When they've faced their fears, sat with their pain, questioned their own beliefs, and come out on the other side with clarity. That's the person who doesn't overreact. That's the person who doesn't crumble under pressure. That's the person who doesn't need to be loud, because they've already earned their silence. And the crazy part? That person can be you, but only if you stop rushing to be understood. Stop needing to have the last word. Stop wasting your voice on people who aren't even listening. Start holding your words like they matter. Start pausing before you speak. Start choosing presence over performance. You don't have to explain yourself to everyone. You don't have to win every debate. You don't have to convince people who've already made up their minds. Let your life speak for itself. Let your discipline speak for itself. Let your silence speak for itself. Because the more you say, the less people hear, but the less you say, the more power your voice carries. And when you understand that, really understand it, you'll stop chasing attention. You'll stop proving your worth. You'll stop reacting to noise. And instead, you'll become the stillness in the storm, the grounded presence in the chaos, the quiet force that doesn't flinch, doesn't shout, doesn't beg to be seen, because it already knows. It is the signal in the noise, the calm in the fire, the silence that speaks louder than words. Stay sharp, stay quiet, stay powerful. And if you want more content that explores the psychology of power, Stoicism, and deep inner clarity, give this video a like. Drop a comment and let me know what resonated with you the most. Your insights matter more than you think. And subscribe, not for the noise but for the silence between the words.